Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan and welcome to the latest episode of our sports show. As you know, we've been previewing on air for the last month or so about our on-running rugby documentary. It's called Global Rugby Legends, My Life in Rugby, where we speak to prominent players and ex-players from the Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere countries. So we've interviewed players from England, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, Italy, France, and in the Southern Hemisphere countries, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina. And our special guest this evening is well known in Irish sporting circles and Irish rugby circles, but he's also known very much. He's a settled Irish man, but he's very much a Kiwi man at heart, and all his international rugby playing career was done for New Zealand. He's made his name in Ireland through his time at St Mary's and Leinster A, and then obviously his rugby punditry work as well, the one and only Brent Pope. And Brent, first of all, delighted to have you on, delighted for you to share your story with us today. And tell us, was New Zealand a rugby-mad country in the 1970s when you were a 10 or 11-year-old child? Was it still very chaotic then in terms of rugby?
I'm glad you said I was about 10 or 11 by then, because I was going to think people watching New Zealand will know that I'm not in my 50s. Yeah, rugby mad. Like everybody grows up in New Zealand around that generation of wanting to be a rugby player. You're more or less given a rugby ball from the cot, you know, and you're playing outside and all those early days. I have great memories of, you know, playing sock rugby in the corridors when it was wet, and going out with my friends and playing rugby, playing all sports in those days in New Zealand, but certainly rugby. I always remember a story of my first game, I think, was for Celtic, which is a Marist equivalent team, Catholic-based team in New Zealand, local community. And my father getting my gear, I think I was about 4.5 years of age. And I remember waking him up every day at about 6 in the morning, knocking on the door saying, "Dad, is it rugby yet?" And him saying, "Look, go back to bed. It's only Thursday," you know. So it was exciting. It was an exciting upbringing. I come from a small rural town out of Christchurch called Ashburton, and we lived out in the country. So it was a wonderful Huckleberry Finn type lifestyle of going out on your bikes and that from the morning till you come in at night. Your mother would call you in when the sun went down, and playing with my friends, and swimming and running and rugby and cricket and softball and all these sports. So it was a fantastic upbringing.
Yeah, you mentioned cricket there, and obviously cricket has a deep sort of history with New Zealand as well. Were you very much the avid cricket player growing up as a teenager, as a child? Was rugby your first love, but were you quite good at cricket as well?
Unfortunately, like my brother had a shot of growth. I was a kind of I suppose, a chubby-faced, I suppose you'd say, you know, slightly overweight young boy or something. So when I first played rugby, at schools I had the kind of longish hair, and I was a midfield back. So I was always quite fast. And then I had a sudden spurt. So from one season to the next, I went from second 5'8" or inside centre at that stage to second row to lock in 1 year. So I shot up in growth. But yeah, the cricket was probably what I was better at, actually, to be honest, than rugby, because, you know, until I went into the forwards, I was actually a pretty promising cricket player. I was a leg spinner, which was quite unusual, and showed a bit of promise at representative level. I had a couple of trials for bigger teams, and played senior cricket before I played rugby. I mean, senior men's cricket. I then wanted to be a fast bowler, because being a spin bowler wasn't sort of cool. You know, I wanted to be like Imran Khan or Dennis Lilly and have the medallion bouncing off your chest and the sort of the loose jumper and coming in and terrorising players. And I was pretty quick. I used to open the bowling and bat about number 3. But then kind of rugby took over, because I with a very good first 15. I come from a school that wasn't really steeped in rugby history. We never had really any All Blacks or representative players from the school I was at, and but then we just fluked upon a very good coach, and Bevan Bain, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, and then we just had a great team, and we beat a lot of the fancy teams in Christchurch at that stage. I think we played Christ College and Christchurch Boys, and mine was a co-ed school because we weren't expected to beat them. So we had a good year, and that sort of propelled me onto the sort of, I suppose, the underage scene, and with the South Island and various teams I played for before I went off to university. So part of self-criticism, I don't think, even looking back now, I don't think I ever believed, I don't really think I believed in myself enough, because I had to be told all the time that I was a talented rugby player. I was quite a shy kid, and that plays into my anxiety issues later in life and issues with mental health, because I just didn't have a lot of self-belief in myself. I would tell my parents I'm playing away from town. I didn't want them to come and see me play rugby, even though I was good at it. I don't know. I didn't have enough self-belief. I didn't have enough confidence. Whenever I'd go into teams, I wouldn't put myself forward like other players would. I'd stand very much in the background, and even though that wasn't represented by my personality on the field, because I was an aggressive, compromising, hard-nosed player, but that could be further from the truth of what I was like as a person, if that makes sense,
And Brent, were you the most talented sports person in your family in terms of your brothers and sisters? Did you have, I don't know, I know you mentioned a brother there. I don't know if you have sisters, or were you the most talented growing up in that sort of family household?
Well, no, actually. My father was New Zealand long jump champion at one stage and a very good sprinter. So that's where I got my fast twitch fibers from. They talk about that in the physio. So I was very fast. My mother was from a well-known horse racing family, horse breeders, very successful. I mean, Mum got inducted to the Racing Hall of Fame in New Zealand. I think she was the first woman president in Australasia of a major racing club. Dad was a very good golfer. Was just about a scratch golfer, even though he didn't play that much. My brother was more into the horse scene, which I was early on, and we were both quite good riders, sort of point to point and sort of show jumping and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm talented in the sense that I took up cricket and rugby. Cricket was my summer sport. Rugby was a winter sport. My brother probably went down the more academic side of things, although was certainly involved in horses and still is. So yeah, I got some degree of athleticism from both mum and dad, but yeah, I was pretty talented at a lot of sports. I not being egotistical, but any sport I played. I think at one stage at school I was in the kind of first 11 football side. I was in the softball side. I was in the cricket side. I was in the basketball. I was a good table tennis player. So I loved a lot of sports, and I think that was a way of looking at those days. That gave me skills for rugby over a lot of different things, handling skills, being able to run with the ball, all those sort of skills, because I played so many different sports.
And Brent, as we know, growing up in the 70s and 80s until the late 90s, rugby was an amateur sort of sport. So yeah. Obviously growing up, your parents wanted you to pursue a professional sort of career in terms of academically wise. And I know you went to Otago sort of university. What did you go there to study?
Well, we come from a farming background. My father was involved in the meat export industry, and we had land, and my mother bred racehorses, but her family was well known as a farming family. So I went to agricultural university for the first couple of years, which was Lincoln College, which was the home of Richie McCaw later, and it's the home of a lot of players now. So I played for their first 15 in the Canterbury competition, and I made the kind of Canterbury squad when they were very powerful at an early age. And then within about a couple of weeks, I got approached by Laurie Mains, who ended up being All Black coach, was the then incoming Otago coach. So they approached me and said, look, would you not finish off your degree or study down at Otago University, where I had friends? And I said, yeah. And so I went down there and I started playing with Otago. I loved university rugby. I always played for university teams. and got university blues and all those sorts of things. I loved that period of my life, playing rugby with friends and just for the love of it and the crack off the field and the socialising with university teams. And then I made my way into Otago and cemented my position there as, first of all, as a number 7, an open side flanker. That's when I had my first All Black trial. Actually, I look back at scrapbooks now, and there's an article there that two players, this is prior to the World Cup in '87 in New Zealand, that 2 players were vying for the number 7 role. One of them was myself, and the other was Michael Jones. Of course, he went on to become one of the best players ever in the world of rugby, as did other compatriots that I played against at that stage. So that was the kind of trajectory. Target for a few years. Paul Henderson, a future All Black captain, then came from Southland to Otago, and Mike Brewer was at number 8 at that stage, another All Black captain in the making. He moved over to number 6, and I sort of became the number 8 for the next 10 years for Otago, and played in a wonderful combination of loose forwards over that era, starting with Paul Henderson and Mike Brewer, both All Blacks, then moving on to Josh Confield, Aaron Penne, Jamie Joseph. I played with all those guys as part of a loose forward trio. Unfortunately for me, I'm probably the only player that played at those areas that, through no fault of my own, just through injury, that didn't make that World Cup squad in 1987. And I was primed to do so. And, even now it still hurts. People often ask, you look back on your life and certain things. And I look back and think, I just got player of the match in a trial match. The team was being announced for the World Cup a couple of days later. I'd just been named player of the match over the radio, and then bang, I found myself in hospital with a badly broken, dislocated arm, and I broke it in about 6 or 7 places. And the selectors rang the hospital and said, "Look, is Brent, available for the World Cup?" And the doctor said, "No, he might not play rugby again, at that stage." And so I pulled out, and it came back to haunt me, a couple of years later when I went through, some down days, and that didn't help, because it's like somebody pulled the rugs out of my dreams. Like I had all these dreams of coming from a small town kid from Ashburton and making the World Cup squad, and everybody, being so proud of me, to being in hospital when the team is announced. They flew Zinzan Brook in a couple of days later, and he, of course, Zinny and I are good mates, and he went on to become, one of the greatest players of all time, along with Michael Jones and Buck Shelford and other players that were involved in that stage. And you always wonder, you always wonder how good you could have been, when those players are talked about as the greatest. I'm not saying that I would have been another Zinzan Brook or whatever like that. I'm not saying that, but all I'm saying is that, when I come up against those guys, playing them regularly, I always gave as good as I got. And, I would have liked to have seen where that had led me. But look, as the Irish would say, swings and roundabouts, and that really facilitated my move to Ireland. So because we won the Otago, won the national championship for the first time in their history in 1991, of which I was very much a part of that squad. And again, on the trajectory coming back after injury to be involved in the All Blacks again. I got the disappointment then of being the extra man that they didn't take to Japan on an All Black tour, because the game was cancelled and they didn't think they needed. In those days, they would only take maybe 26 or 27 players on a tour, not like they do now where they take 40 or 50 players. In those days, they only took 25 or 26 players. So I was the kind of, I suppose the bridesmaid, never the bride. But
Brent, if I don't mind if I ask, come in there just with one question.
Yeah.
At the time, obviously, when you were playing in New Zealand at the time, and obviously you're playing with Otago, you mentioned there the World Cup. during the week, obviously, what was your prime job in terms of what were you sort of working as in a weekly basis?
Yeah.
And was it difficult to leave that job then and travel to another continent, really, in terms of, were you financially secure in your work life, personal life, relationship life, that you were able to just pack up and go and be able to come across here to Ireland in terms of that? Were you financially secure in a good job in New Zealand?
Yes, excellent job, but far from it. But going back, I sort of got way later, but there, I studied valuation, property valuation. Initially, rural and commercial valuation. Then I went to Otago and I finished that. So I moved into real estate as a commercial valuer, and I had a great job and a great lifestyle. In those days I was valuing hotels, so I would be down in Queenstown and these beautiful places, spending a week down there valuing hotels, and I was very fit. I was one of the fittest rugby players in New Zealand because I trained like a triathlete. I was always a good cross-country runner at school, obviously coming from my father's athletic background. So I was a good cross-country runner at school, and I always kept fit. So it was, I'd be out. Before rugby was professional, I was training probably as a professional player. Like what did that entail? That would have been getting up at 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, an hour maybe in the gym. Then I'd go for sort of my long run at lunchtime or whatever, for an hour and a half. Then in the evenings I would train again with ball skills and that. So I was really in tune with what it took to be the top of my game, and I was fit. But then outside of that, I had a wonderful job. I then set up on my own as a valuer. I had a nice place that I bought. I had a nice car, had all those trappings of success. I was, on the outside looking in, I was probably very successful. I was dating a lovely woman at the time, Susan Malthus or something like that. Life was good. But then it suddenly came crumbling down, unfortunately. And I had been masking mental health issues all my life, anxiety issues, panic attacks, bouts of depression. I couldn't understand. I just knew that I was hurting, and I couldn't draw the line between physical fitness and mental fitness, because while I was physically fit, I wasn't mentally fit. And I mastered, as I said, I was the class joker, the team clown, the person that wouldn't worry about anything really from that. I had a lot of great friends, and I was very popular and all those things. But that didn't stop me suffering horrendously in those days. And I'd have to say I went down some pretty dark avenues, and had to talk to people and to talk to the Samaritans and everything like that. And everything just fell away in my life. I remember ringing my father saying that I can't play rugby anymore. You're looking at a 17-stone guy in tears calling his father after a game and just saying, "Dad, will you come and get me, because I just can't handle the anxiety. I can't handle," I'm not saying that I couldn't handle the pressure, but then other things tumbled. I let someone I care about go, and I just wanted to be on my own, because I thought that nobody would want to be around with me, and I ostracized myself from my friends, and yes, it was a dark period of my life, and I couldn't fix it, and I didn't know who to talk to, and I didn't know where I could go, and I was in despair. And in a way, that prompted me to make that move, because I just couldn't continue the way that I was. I had to get out of town, and I had to get away from that environment and start again somewhere. And I thought that Ireland would be the perfect place, because I wouldn't be known. People wouldn't have placed as much pressure on me. I wouldn't have had to explain myself to friends and have to go through judgment and all those things, which I thought that people were feeling. The disappointments of my injuries came back. The disappointments of my broken relationships came back. The disappointments of my personality all came back. And then I just thought, look, escape it. And it was the best thing that I did, because it allowed me to come to Ireland, be kind of anonymous for a while, and seek help over here, professional help, I mean, and try to get my life back on track. And it worked. I met some wonderful people in Ireland and people I'm still friendly with now, and they helped me to rebuild my life to such an extent that I should have gone back after those 3 months again and hooked back up with New Zealand Rugby. But I felt a loyalty to the Irish people and loyalty for the friends and that I've made that saved me. And so I stuck around, you know, and I never thought I'd be on TV or anything like that. I never thought I'd be known in Ireland like I was known in New Zealand, maybe even more so. That didn't occur to me. All that occurred to me was that I'm in a reasonably happy place. And that meant more to me than the rugby side of it, you know.
Yeah.
So people don't realise that, and I don't share it too often, but that's the reason I came to Ireland in a way. And people always think it's a reason because I came to play rugby or something. No, it was because I kind of come to get away, and it was a rebirth in a way, you know, because I had to get away from that toxic environment. That's the first advice I give to people now, that, you know, if they're stuck in that rabbit hole of anxiety or depression or whatever, is to get out of that as best you can and start afresh somewhere else. You know, it may mean rejecting some friends, it may mean rejecting drink, it may mean anything, but just to motivate yourself to get a new start, you know.
Brent, powerful stuff. Brent, I'm just wondering about the coaching sort of element now coming to Ireland. Whereas you as a player, were you very tactical? Were you very insightful? Were you one of those players who went home and played the game in his head? Were you always a conscious study of the game? Was it a natural progression for you to come here to Ireland and go into coaching, or was it something that you thought about as a player?
That's a really, you know what, that's a really good, I know people say they're cliche, but it is a really good question for me. My greatest strengths as a coach are singularly my ability to motivate players. And while I wasn't a tactical genius, I also played in a position, having played a bit of rugby in the backs, and then having played a bit in the tight forwards, and then having played a bit in the loose forwards. I truly believe that loose forwards make good coaches, because they would know a bit about back play and they'd know a bit about loose forward play, and so they'd know the link. Because in my day, props wouldn't touch the ball. So, you know, you scrummed and just go forward with the ball from A to B, second rows or locks in New Zealand, win the ball at line out time, grunt and push at the scrum time, and then forget about you. Loose forwards then were the link between the backs and the forwards. So you had to have an understanding of how both plays would work. And there was sometimes the moves, especially from number 8, were quite intricate, you know, with the 8-9s and 9-8s and all those things. So yes, I had a quite a good tactical awareness. But I went off to Clontarf to start my coaching, and I had a really good ability of making players work for me. And you know, if coaching styles, if you talk about all the styles that I've seen of coaches, mine would probably be more along the lines of someone like Declan Kidney rather than, say, Eddie O'Sullivan or Joe Schmidt. Mine would be an ability to get players to play above their usual standard all the time. And when we got that Clontarf rugby team that started in Division 3, went up to Division 1 and won the Leinster Cup, you know, it was an amalgamation of a lot of players that I'd seen talented for other clubs, but they just weren't being motivated. So I brought them all together. And, you know, I was good at the greatest strength was getting the best out of players, and a bit like Declan Kidney. And also knowing, like Kai Woodward, knowing when to bring people in that had the expertise. Because when I went back to Mary's, I was asked to go back to Mary's to coach because they had a great team on paper, but they'd always failed at the last hurdle. And they had players at there was 13 internationals in that Mary's side at one stage. So I had to really question my ability to be able to teach those guys anything. Like, what was I going to teach Dennis Hickey about wing play? But what I believed I could do was I believed I could bring them all together in around Trevor. I made Trevor Brennan captain. I believed I could bring all the players in around Trevor and Victor Costello and these key players, and I could produce a winning side. And that's just what we did. So I think they'd say the same about me as a coach. I think they would say the same complimentary wise, and that, you know, Brent was always fair and he was always honest and he wanted the best for the team. Tactically, probably I wasn't as astute as other coaches, but I always got people in that could do that, or I let the players have responsibility themselves. And I still think I would love to have coached at a higher level. And there was a stage where I had to make a decision. I got offered to interview for a couple of jobs, one in France. I think Northampton was the other one. I'm going back years now. Ulster was the other one, I think, that came looking to say, after my success at sort of club level and then with Leinster A, they came and said, would you be interested? And I then had to make a decision of where my future path lay. Was it the media or was it coaching? And we're talking about a time when Warren Gatlin, by the way, was on the same trajectory, as was Joe Smith to a lesser degree. Warren was with Galwegians about the same time I was with Mary's, or 2 years in between. And look where his career's gone, you know, like, yeah. So I wonder sometimes, yeah.
If it was Leinster A, if Leinster the first team, I know you coached Leinster B, but if it was Leinster rather than Ulster had came knocking at the door for you, would you have taken it?
Yeah, I think I would have. But I would have wanted to go into a team that I had to build, if that makes sense. I wouldn't be interested even now of going back to a team that's already successful. I would rather go in and kind of build a team from the foundations up and say, look, this is going to take a couple of years, but you know, we'll get there, because that gave me time to get the players' trust in what I was doing long term rather than short term. I don't think I was tactically astute enough to come into a team in 2 weeks and say, look, you're doing all this wrong, let's go back and let's do this and this. Maybe someone like Eddie O'Sullivan and that could do that. Or Joe Schmidt, or these guys. I didn't have that ability, and I'll be the first to admit it. But what I did have the ability was to maybe gel a team together so that they were playing to the very best of their ability. And as a coach, actually, that's all you can ask for. Really, that's all you can ask for, that you get the best out of whatever team you coach. And it shouldn't be about trophies or whatever. It should be about leaving a team in a better position after you finish than you left them. But I would have liked to have seen, I see all these coaches now on the coaching carousel, you know, and they go from one team to the next and one team, and some of them can have 15 years of no success. And I sort of look back and I think, you know, that could have been me. I could have made a pretty good living out of coaching. You know, I probably could have gone back to New Zealand again. I was approached a couple of times to maybe go back and start at the sort of Super 12 or Super 10s, go back and be involved with Otago rugby again. And I could have probably done that. But I was enjoying my time with George and on the TV, and I was enjoying that side of it too. And so I decided that's where my future lay, really, you know.
And the punditry work, Brent, when you started with RT, say in the 90s as well, France and England were so dominant in the Six Nations. And you obviously, you to come in and you to give a fresh, fair perspective. And sometimes you had to call it like what you call it, what you see in front of you. And there were some lean, dark years for the likes of Ireland and Wales. Was it harsh in those years to be so, let's say, if the performance was so bad, to just call it as what it was, like, you know, in terms of there were some dark days in the 90s. It's not as rosy as what we all think it is now that we've seen.
Far from it. I mean, you know, you most of the time when Ireland went away from Lansdowne Road, they lost. You know, I can't remember going over to Scotland for those first few years and ever being following an Irish team that ever won over there, let alone them beating the All Blacks and it being a regular occasion, or beating England on a regular occasion. So a bit like my coaching, I was never as honest as George was, but I always tried to be honest from the players' point of view, because I knew them and I knew what they would be thinking. And I tried to say, look, hey, in Ireland, it's not a professional game. You know, and even though New Zealand wasn't a professional game in the sense that players were being paid for it, they weren't. But the way that you trained, and that is a bit of akin to being a top GAA player, because they trained so hard, but they were never paid.